Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC.
A man who's gone through hell, but he's kept going, and he's smart, and he's strong, and people love him. Not everybody, but people love him and respect him. Roger Stone.
Now, here's Roger Stone.
This is a Roger Stone, and this is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC. Joining me today is one of the country's most prominent and respected criminal defense attorneys, David Schoen. Very ably represented President Donald Trump in his first impeachment, and he is a shrewd analyst, not only of the courtroom and legal situations, but he is that rare lawyer who understands the impact of media coverage, politics, and the entire overlay that one must take into consideration in analyzing any legal case that is extraordinarily prominent. I am particularly honored to have David Schoen. Welcome to the show here, David.
It's my honor to be on it. Thank you very much.
So, David, from a political point of view, and I'm just a political analyst, I'm obviously not an attorney, but I have never seen political strength like this on behalf of President Donald Trump in a way that is counterintuitive. His candidacy for president, his ability to raise the resources for a candidacy for president, his poll numbers have merely gained with every civil or criminal indictment against him in any and every jurisdiction. Normally speaking, when a candidate for public office is charged with a criminal offense, their money dries up, their support dries up, and very soon their candidacy dries up. What I've seen here is the exact opposite, and therefore I have fewer and fewer reservations about Donald Trump's ability to win the White House in the next election. My only concern, I should say my largest concern, is this tsunami of lawfare that has been filed against him. So I'd like to go into these cases kind of one by one to get your expert analysis, because I'm trying to figure out how this all comes out. The case that has gotten the most coverage recently, it's a civil case. It is a case in which New York State Attorney General Letitia James essentially accused the Trump Organization, Donald Trump, and other executive members of his family of, I'm not really sure, of evaluating the value of assets in order to get loans from banks, loans that appear to me to have been paid back in full. What is this all about?
All right, so a great question, of course, since it's coming from you. I want to just remark on your prefatory comment that you're only coming at this from a political perspective. I think, quite frankly, that is the primary perspective that's most important here, because I think that each of these prosecutions and the civil case are politically motivated. They're to advance a partisan political agenda, stop Donald Trump at all costs. I think it reflects back to Jerry Nadler's comment in Congress, we can't trust the voters. Therefore, that is an un-American comment as I've ever heard, especially from a congressman. And the idea is that all energies have to be marshaled to stop President Trump from becoming president again. I think that's what's at the heart of it. But, yeah, I think that this present case being litigated in New York certainly highlights the problem. But each of them does in its own reason. This case, just so that the listeners are aware, is, you know, you hit some of the central points, but It's an extremely broad and subject to abuse law called New York Executive Law 6312, 12 in parentheses, gives very broad powers to the Attorney General. It gives virtually unfettered powers, gives very broad powers to a judge in this case who has already proven himself to be a political partisan, a Trump hater. And unlike every other fraud statute, it doesn't require any victim in the case, any loss. You said, you understood bank loans have been paid back. Of course, that's right. Usually, the traditional notion of fraud is someone says or does something, and somebody else relies on that to their detriment. That's sort of the definition of fraud, a material fact somebody else relies on to their detriment. Somebody's hurt by it. This statute doesn't require that at all. In fact, there's a case under it that says the traditional elements of fraud have been abandoned under this statute. And so it's just up to the discretion of a judge, who in this case appears to be usurping the role of expert witnesses on valuation. But basically the case is just what you said. They're accusing President Trump of overstating the values of properties, undercut credibility-wise, of course, by the reference to Mar-a-Lago being valued at perhaps $18 million in reality. Bears no resemblance to reality. Nobody could pick up that kind of property for any multiple of that number. But so that's what we're talking about. So even if it were puffery, so to speak, they're penalizing that now. They want to strip him of his business licenses in New York. They want to have someone else take over some of his properties and run his business because they don't like the valuation he put on it. Even though no one ever relied to that to their detriment, nobody lost anything. He's Donald Trump. They completely devalue the value of the brand of Trump. That's why his properties, one of the reasons why his properties are worth more than somebody might otherwise think, even objectively. They're the kinds of properties that some foreigner might come, if they were able to afford it, would pay many multiples market value for, and that's all relevant to valuation. It's an absurd case, but if anyone wondered, why it's brought, they should look at the timing. It's not coincidental that this is brought during the election year, and especially now he's leading in the polls by far. Same reason the other cases were brought. Donald Trump, as you well know, you've known him a lot longer than I have and a lot better, has been operating his businesses as an international brand for decades. Why all of a sudden now, in the course of an election campaign, do they choose to bring this? And what should be most offensive, perhaps, to the listeners is by a prosecutor who ran on a platform of getting Donald Trump. That doesn't go ethically in our system. We don't have prosecutors who single out citizens they don't like or they're afraid of or they don't want to be holding public office and single them out to go after with the resources of the state. It's outrageous. It's unethical. Never should have happened. But that's last thing I want to say. I know I'm talking an awful lot. The last thing I want to say is that, to me, is partially what explains his a resounding lead in the polls. I think it's certainly policy-based and all of that. People harken back to that time instead of this kind of economy and this kind of unstable world, that sort of thing. But I think basically Americans are fair-minded, and they see this piling on, and they see these kinds of claims. They don't understand a fraud claim without any loss, that sort of thing. And I think that catapults them even higher in the polls. That's my view.
So it is my understanding in this particular case, while the appeals court stayed any immediate action regarding the status of his business licenses or his properties, they did not stay the actual trial, which will now go forward, correct?
That's right. I think what happened is his lawyers tried to get the stay put on the taking away of his business certificates and licenses and having a third party take them over, and tried to stop the trial. I think that the Attorney General fought them on trying to stop the trial, and so the appellate division ruled in her favor on that. The trial goes forward, but the Attorney General conceded that the business license, taking away the business licenses and so on, should be stayed until there's a judgment in the case, and so the Court of Appeals agreed with both parties on that and stayed that, so they're not taking away the properties right away. But can you imagine properties that were built up over literally decades on the brand Trump taken away because they don't like the valuations he put on it, notwithstanding expert opinion on the other side of the equation and so on, from a judge who's had two other major cases with developers, ruled against the developer in each case, and been reversed each time?
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
This episode is brought to you by GMC. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the GMC Certified Service Fresh Start Tire Event. Visit gmc.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables. Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft, pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
Yeah, I have talked to several, but one particular real estate appraiser in South Florida who's widely respected, who told me the evaluation of Mar-a-Lago at $18 million was a joke. He said, first of all, I'm not sure you could put a number on it. It's valuable because of its iconic nature. And then when you add the fact that it both fronts on the intercoastal waterway as well as the Atlantic Ocean, which is very rare on Palm Beach Island, he's not sure you could put a number on it, but he says it's certainly in excess of $300 million, could be as much as $500 million. He said, I'm not sure you could really ever put a number on it. It's kind of what somebody would be willing to pay for it. And he said, in this case, somebody might be willing to pay as much as $1 billion. Let's touch, if we can, on the other local New York case. We can do this quickly, the so-called business records case. This one makes me scratch my head because this seems to me it should have been a civil case, but somehow this so-called hush money case, based solely on the claims of a former porn star and one of Trump's former lawyers, somehow became a criminal case. How did this happen?
Yeah, it's outrageous. And again, you've got a district attorney in this case who ran on a platform of being the one candidate who vowed to get Trump, get a conviction of Trump, a man who was a citizen, wasn't even under investigation at the time. You also know that the case sat around in the office and that the powers that be in the office, including the district attorney himself, did not feel this case should ever be brought. The special counsel brought in from a private law firm, Mark Pomeranz, has written a book about this, and in the book he acknowledges that the bosses and the different divisions were against this case, didn't think it was merited or should be brought, but it was brought anyway. I think the case is fundamentally flawed from the start in the charging document. This is a case in which they have a cockamamie way of rigging it into a felony. They charged doctoring business records in order to commit a felony, and they don't charge what the target crime is. So one can speculate, they've talked about tax improprieties, so maybe it's about taxes. Or they've talked about interfering with the election, that Stormy Daniels was paid hush money to affect the election. One can't possibly effectively defend this case without knowing what the crime is that they were supposedly doctoring business records to hide. They're completely different defenses depending on what the target crime is. And it wouldn't do any good now for the district attorney just to give them a bill of particulars or somehow specify what they think the crime was. You're entitled to an indictment from the grand jury. The grand jury clearly didn't decide what the felony was supposed to be, the target of the doctoring the business records. I think the thing has to be thrown out, but they have a judge who's a real Trump hater. Also, not coincidental, he was assigned to the Trump Organization case, another civil case. He was assigned to the Bannon case that's going now, and the Trump case. They have a lot of judges there. They have a problem in that court that's been documented in the past of having the district attorney handpick judges to oversee grand jury proceedings and then having that judge who they handpicked stay on the case. That was litigated. It was brought in action by New York criminal defense lawyers years ago. The court said, well, you don't have a constitutional right under the state to a particular judge or to go into the wheel for random selection. But when the case was brought in federal court, the federal court said, had this been on direct appeal, there's a very good chance we would have said this has at least the appearance of impropriety. We should not allow this kind of selection. Now, in this case, they're claiming that the chief administrative judge put this Judge Merchan on the case because it was necessary for his expertise or something like that. It looks terrible. You need, in a case like this, you're prosecuting a former president of the United States, trying to stop him from being able to run by tying him up all the time. You need to be more than above board in the case if you want the American people to accept the result. The American people are speaking. One of the reasons he's soaring in the polls, as I say.
It's also my understanding that in this case, Judge Merchant gave a $50 contribution to the presidential campaign of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Would that alone not be enough for the judge himself to realize that he has the appearance, at a minimum, of bias?
Should have been, but he got an opinion letter from an ethics board saying, well, that's a de minimis contribution, therefore it shouldn't be disqualifying. They're missing the point here. Our justice system is only as good as the public's confidence in its fairness and integrity. There's no objective person who could look at this, hear the judge's comments about President Trump in the past, see what his agenda is, and think it's appropriate for him to sit on this case or that the case should be able to go forward as a matter of due process, Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights here, the way it has been charged.
Look, since I am obviously a strong and vocal supporter of Donald Trump, I do feel it's necessary for me to point out that David Schoen is not a Republican, has represented the Democratic Party in a number of important voting rights cases in the South. And therefore, I rely on him today for his his legal expertise. I think it's fair to say that in representing President Trump, he developed a personal affinity for him, but I think his views are objective. Let's turn, if we may, to the so-called documents case. This one is a head-scratcher as well. President Trump argues that under the 1977 Presidential Documents Act, that he, as president, is entitled to do whatever he wants with his presidential documents. And he points to a decision by Judge Amy Berman Jackson, a judge who sat in my case, that allowed Bill Clinton to keep his personal documents, in his case, in his sock drawer. David, do you think that that is going to be an effective defense in that case?
Yeah, the Presidential Records Act certainly is one of the primary defenses the lawyers intend to pursue. It must really stick in Judge Amy Berman Jackson's craw, since she's really one of the most notorious Trump haters on that bench that unfortunately was a great court at one time but has now become filled almost with Trump haters. But anyway, yeah, and so her decision essentially says that the president has the discretion to determine what are presidential documents and what are personal documents, and that he would have had that right is the defense. I think there's even a more basic impediment to this prosecution, and that is the decision by another real Trump-hating judge, Judge Beryl Howell, who was then the chief judge in the district court in D.C., turning over almost in wholesale fashion President Trump's lawyer, Evan Corcoran's notes, his notes to himself and to the file on observations in the case, without giving him a chance to check any redactions in the case and that sort of thing. That clearly, in my view, was inappropriate. She found it satisfied the crime fraud exception, apparently. It's impossible to believe that all of those notes did. And I think at the end of the day, if it goes forward, Evan Corcoran's going to end up being a great witness for President Trump to explain what his notes meant. But I think that turning over those notes tainted the entire grand jury process and therefore the indictment in the case, and ought to be thrown out on those grounds alone before even getting to the other question. And then, of course, from the public's perception, the idea that, you have to show that someone knowingly, willfully acted under this case, knowing they were doing something the law prohibited by having these documents. Donald Trump was a newcomer to politics and certainly to the Presidential Records Act and all of this. And while they want to say, well, some of his advisors told him he couldn't have this, others told him it was up to him. And so he was entitled to believe who he believed. It's his state of mind that controls. I can tell you he didn't believe he was doing anything wrong. But on the other hand, we see President Biden with documents apparently containing classified information in all sorts of places where they shouldn't have been. He's a guy who's been in politics his entire life, his entire adult life. So if anyone should have known and therefore acted willfully that he wasn't entitled to those documents, and that should have been President Biden, who wasn't president at the time and therefore didn't have the same rights under the Presidential Records Act. So we'll see. There's a report, that he met with the special counsel who's been assigned to him this past week on a couple of occasions, but we haven't seen any prosecution there. I don't know that there should be, but if there isn't, then there certainly shouldn't be of Donald Trump.
Well, we also don't seem to have any leaks out of that investigation,
Right.
whereas all these other investigations seem to leak like a sieve. Folks, if you're just tuning in, I'm Roger Stone. This is the Roger Stone Show on 77 WABC Radio, and we're interviewing one of the country's most prominent criminal defense attorneys, David Schoen, and we're very, very happy to have him with us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. David, two cases I guess you have to see in similar context. The Washington, D.C. case brought by Special Counsel Jack Smith and the Georgia case brought by Fani Willis. In both cases, it appears to me that Donald Trump is being charged with questioning the outcome of an election.
Yeah.
And that somehow become a crime. I would think that it's within his First Amendment rights to question an election.
Yeah, and beyond that, it's possible, I think it certainly has a fair argument to be made that he had an obligation. His obligation under the Constitution is to ensure fairness of the elections and that the laws of the United States are faithfully executed. He took an oath of office for that. The Constitution requires it. And under the faithfully executed clause, if he believed that the election was marked by fraud or what they call, stolen or election fraud and so on, whatever term one used, that there were improprieties in the election, his argument would be that under the Constitution he had an obligation to investigate and to question and to test those things. So again, they want to say in both cases, well, but other people around him told him that the election was fair and they didn't have evidence of it. Well, Bernie Kerik, who did a lot of the investigation for him, would tell you that he provided President Trump with reams and reams of evidence reflecting improprieties in the election. Whether one believes that those things were accurate or not, the point here is when you're charging a person criminally, what did the defendant believe? The defendant certainly believed. I can tell you in his heart and soul, Donald Trump believes that the election was stolen from him, that there was fraud that determined the election. That's his belief. Everyone is entitled to disagree or agree with it. But what matters is his mens rea, his state of mind for these criminal prosecutions. You can argue at the polls, don't vote for Donald Trump because, he's claiming election fraud and you don't believe that happened. Or his supporters, at least half the country, it would appear, would say, no, vote for Donald Trump because the last election was stolen from him. Either way, those are political discussions to have, and anyone is entitled to their position, whether it's fact-based or not. What you can't do is charge someone criminally without showing that person had that mens rea. Now, that state of mind, a criminal state of mind. In both cases, the prosecutors are going to claim that's what they can prove, and part of it is they say, well, this one heard him say that he knew, this was a phony claim and all that. Listen, I'm telling you today, speak to him regularly. Donald Trump believes that the election was stolen from him, and he acted accordingly. He acted what he believed that the Constitution required and what lawyers around him told him the Constitution required and that must be done to ensure fair elections. And we want to say, well, he didn't have any authority in a state election. It wasn't a state election. It's an election for the presidency of the United States that took place in the state as they always occur.
PMS, pregnancy, menopause. Being a woman is a lot. Ollie supports you and yours with expert solutions for every age and life stage. They just launched 2 new products exclusively at Walmart. Period Hero combats bloat, mood swings, and more during PMS. And Balance Perimeno to support hormonal balance, mood, and metabolism during perimenopause. Grab yours at Ollie.com. Ollie! These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injuries and additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentix advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panico will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentix secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentix. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTIX or Cosentix.com/Cindy.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Also, this entire argument, which is not constitutionally or historically correct. I have never advocated the formulation of panels of fake electors, but it is beyond dispute that Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution grants the state legislatures the power to award the presidential electors to a candidate for president based on the results of the election returns within that state. And to say, there was some wholesale fraud here. We have a historical precedent. In 1960, in Hawaii, it was thought election night that Vice President Richard Nixon had carried the state of Hawaii. His electors were actually approved. The supporters of John F. Kennedy objected. They formed a slate of alternative electors. And in the final analysis, when all of the absentee ballots were counted, JFK had in fact carried Hawaii. The Nixon electors were essentially deselected. The Kennedy electors were selected and went to the Electoral College. I don't know Professor Eastman. I've never read his famous memo, nor do I know this other fellow, Chesborough. But it seems to me that they had at least an underlying legal claim, particularly in Georgia, it seems, which seems to me to be a carbon copy of the D.C. case in many ways. Again, someplace I had no direct or indirect involvement other than reading about it. It's really the same case. In other words, the claim is Trump knew he lost the election, and he was conspiring with others to hold on to power. I don't think that's an accurate depiction of what happened.
No, I don't believe that either, but you're right that that's what both cases charge essentially, and it doesn't really matter, quite frankly, from a criminal perspective, if Eastman or Chesborough were right. This is the information provided to President Trump. He's not a lawyer. He's entitled to rely on lawyers. But, one of the things, from my perspective at least, that's so confounding about it is the laws on how the Electoral College works and how a state binds its electors vary among the states. It's a morass. And so in some states, the electors must vote the way the state election came out. In others, you have faithless electors who cannot vote for the candidate who won that state, and therefore they're not bound under state law. So that varies. What also varies is there's one of the leading experts on election laws, a Trump hater, has written and said that for anyone to say what Mike Pence's, Vice President Pence's authority was at the time on the House floor that's gotten so much press and so on, that's crystal clear, doesn't know what they're talking about. He said that nobody really understands what the authority is under the statute. And, he's someone who thinks President Trump was wrong, but he made clear that it's a very unclear area of the law. And so, again, we don't charge those kinds of things as criminal conduct.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Let me thank our special guest, criminal defense lawyer David Schoen, for joining us on the Roger Stone Show today. I'm very, very grateful that you could join us, David. Have a wonderful Sunday afternoon.
Thank you very much. You too.